Very aggressive. This is the shirt in honor of Thanksgiving here. Um, this is the shirt out of the many shirts that have been sent to me since I've started doing this channel that gets the most attention when I wear it out. And I wear it a lot. I'm a big fan of the movie Rounders. I'm a big and even bigger fan of John Malkovich's rendition of Teddy KGB, which is one of the most over-the-top, ridiculous character actor performances ever. Very aggressive. So people are beginning to ask, what's stuff that I would want for Christmas? You don't have to go nuts. Cash is always nice, and that stuff's below. But if somebody got me a shirt to replace this one or one of the other frickin' Rounder shirts you could find out there, I would absolutely love it. Oh, my arms are looking big today. Be thankful for that. This is Chapter 3. It's done by Matt Jackson. Nice to meet you. My name is Mr. BYWA. And as funny as that art is, hearing it, when you read it in the book, it's twice as funny. So when we last ended our story, Malachi, their brother, the youngest brother, had gotten hit by a car. So then we find out the story. He was crossing the street on his bike, and somebody turned right without looking and ran him over and dragged him. What? A compound fracture of the leg, meaning bone through the skin, which they give a really lurid description of. So there's 11-year-old Malachi being rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. The mom is there, and then the dad is trying to get information and tells the cop to shut up, which is pretty awesome because the cop is trying to admonish Nick and their friend Nolan as if they had done something wrong when all they did was show up and people said the brother was in trouble. Here's the part that's really cool. So he's in the hospital for almost a week. They had to basically put pins and all that stuff in to set the bone. I remember the entire backyard wrestling roster coming to visit Mal in the hospital. If one of our guys was down, it meant we were all down. It's, a common thing is for people to attack backyard wrestling as it's not legit. Of course, it's not legit in the sense that it's not professional wrestling or what it should be, but motherfuck, if you love pro wrestling, you did it. I certainly did. And I was friends with the guys that I did it with. Now, they made friends through their backyard wrestling thing. So there's even a different kind of, and I would argue even a tighter bond there. Really great. Then Matt talks about how he wasn't really interested in school. It's not that he was a bad student, he just wasn't into it. And I remember being in school, and I was always a good student who could just get by. Smart dude. I mean, I have a master's degree. I was pursuing a PhD before I was dumb enough to go into pro wrestling. And his parents, in an unbelievable amount of understanding here, right? On the drive home, she, meaning the mom, told me I'd be homeschooled from now on. But she was stern and listed her numerous expectations of me. I was expected to not only stay on target with curriculum, but to be ahead of my class. And then later on he says, I promised my mom that I would over-deliver, and I stuck to my word, finishing all my work 6 months early and graduating with all A's and B's. Fucking awesome. Right, so they really got to focus on the wrestling thing. They all had to help with their brother while he was recuperating, right? This is a part that I found absolutely amazing. And the backyard wrestling thing didn't just get a chapter. It was a significant part of their lives. So now Nick has talked about it, and now Matt's talking about it. By this point, everybody in the neighborhood had heard about BYWA. We were drawing crowds of 30 to 50 kids every show, and we were getting good because of all the practice we were doing. I have no doubt that that's where they learned to really perfect their high spots. You can be trained to do the basics, and you can be trained on how to deliver moves, but unless you drill them and do them on your own, you're never going to get great. And it's something that I tell the guys that I train all the time, right? The top level concert pianist is not somebody who you have to force to sit down and play the piano. It's the person you have to drag away from the piano. It's my subtle way of saying, if you want to get good at promos, you should be fucking cutting them every day and sending them to me. If I have to force you to do it, you're not going to be fucking great, right? It's like these videos. Am I saying they're great? Not all the time, but fuck. I know whenever I get the call, right, whenever I get the gig, if I was to have to replace somebody on Figure 4 online, if I was to take over like a Jim Cornette spot, I would be able to do it because I'm used to talking about wrestling. I'm covering all the major shows, that kind of thing. And I'm genuinely interested in pro wrestling. It's how you got to be. He talks about getting legit trained. Ron Rivera, the American Wild Child. Um, and all this stuff about breaking wrestling protocol if you're supposed to introduce yourself to everybody. And he cops to this right here. I did not. Dustin, his friend, entered the ring first and appropriately shook all 8 or 9 of the wrestlers' hands as he introduced himself. I did not. I was Mr. BYWA, and as such had developed a big ego and didn't want anything to do with wrestlers from other clubs, especially when it meant being courteous to them. Matt was the best wrestler out of his crew, after all. The only guy who wasn't mad about it was Scorpio Sky, who was apparently one of the students. That's pretty fucking great. And they trained with a number of Southern California wrestlers. I've actually been in shows with a couple of these guys, I know of all of them, but I had actually worked shows with a couple of them. And then Super Dragon. And they were really scared because Super Dragon's reputation was, I don't take any shit. And then Super Dragon showed up without his mask on and he's just a skinny guy. And they were like, oh. And right here they talk about Super Dragon would end up opening Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, and years later he'd refused to book myself or my brother on his shows because of the way I acted that day. So how Matt acted that day was whenever they were given a simple drill to do, he would do some sort of spectacular move, or he would hit a shooting star and look around and expect everybody to be sort of blown away by it. It reminds me of a story. Probably the most famous guy that I had a hand in training actively was Davey Richards. And the first time I met Davey Richards, now he had already learned the bumps and all that kind of stuff, but he came to Atlanta to get refined. And the guy that ran the WWA 4 school before me, Buddy Lee Parker, was a prominent guy at the power plant. So no doubt that's who he was coming to train with. But Buddy Lee was gone because he tried to open up his own school, which failed spectacularly. And I had taken over the WWA 4 school, where before I just rented space in there and still ran with my old students and stuff. But now I'd taken over the whole school. And in comes Davey Richards. And everybody pointed me out that I was the trainer. So he goes to the top rope of one of the rings that we had there and hits this shooting star press to nobody just to show me he can do it. Lands relatively close to me as I'm walking by. And he said, I'll never forget, you didn't even turn and look. You didn't give a shit. And I didn't. Another funny story about Davey is at one point he was really mad at me because he had a tag match because I started doing Thursday night shows out of the gym, which ended up catching on as well. That's why I'm really feeling this like backyard thing he's talking about, because that's what our thing was. It wasn't backyard necessarily, but it was just a show that we were doing, and then people actually caught on that we were doing this great show. It really was great, and they would show up and watch it. But anyway, I had chewed him out because they were just doing too much. They were just doing too much, and nothing had a logical way, and a couple of things I thought were kind of dangerous, and I chewed him out. And now Davey his father was in the business, but his grandfather was more prominently in the business. And apparently he went and complained to his grandfather during like a holiday break, and the grandfather was pissed and was like, that's the guy that should be training you, the guy that will tell you this shit. And Davey would say to me later, he's like, because that's when like Impact and TNA were doing all the like, the X Division stuff was at its height, so they were doing so much spot stuff. So he's like, that's what I wanted to do, and blah, 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 blah. And of course, Davey went on to really popularizing a modern style, this sort of hybrid of like MMA looking stuff combined with Japanese strong style, combined with, just really great. I mean, I'm super proud of Davey, of course, and he came back and wrestled for PCW more than a few times after he had made it. But super cool. But I was just reminded because Matt, who was trying to impress everybody with like, look, I could do the shooting star, and the trainers didn't give a fuck. In fact, were a little pissed that he wasn't doing what they were saying, in the same way that I no-sold Davey. So maybe it's a trainer thing. Maybe they get us together at the same school and fucking we no-sell flashy shit the students could do that I could never do. I have never done a shooting star. I've done moonsaults before, but even that was a bit of a push. So Super Dragon opened up Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. And then the parents announce that they're going to move to Hesperia, which is like an hour away, and their lives are going to be different. They're going to have to leave their homemade ring, of course, and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so that was the big shift in their lives. So they had a final BWA show where the main event would be Mr. BYWA, Matt, against Slick Nick. And after he pinned me to the mat, the entire crew of wrestlers ran in the ring for a big dog pile hug, and they cried because it was very real to them. It's something that they created. It's something that they made. Pretty amazing. So he goes into a little bit about being in the house and how they didn't really care for the neighborhood necessarily. But the internet, he met a girl named Roxy River Chick. Oh. And they struck up a friendship, communicated. It turns out that they knew each other. And at one point, Matt had fucking shined her on. Like when he was a sophomore, she was a freshman. Long story short, this woman, Dana Cruz, looks like she's going to be very important in his life. And so he devotes some time to that. And he ends the chapter with, she might not have known it at the time, but I knew right then and there, one day she would become my wife. And that's where we are with the chapter. The next chapter is called High Risk Wrestling, and it's by Nick. So obviously they're tagging in and out with these chapters. The last two videos I know have been quite long, more than 20 minutes, so I'm going to keep this one right here. I really like the chapter. I really like where the story's going. I feel like I know Matt pretty well now, and Nick as well. So now I'm really interested in getting into the meat of, they've now trained with pro wrestling, and they built another cool part of Matt's thing. I don't want to gloss over it, is when they talk about building the new ring and how much they've learned about pro wrestling rings in 2 years and how they're improving constantly. So again, a couple of people have contacted me and they're like, yeah, but I just hate the Bucks. That's irrelevant to me. I think you owe it to yourself to read this book because it's going to turn out, I'm quite sure, being the best wrestling book released this year. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but it is, because we've had quite a few, and we have quite a few still coming out. The Buddy Rogers book I'm really interested in because I love that era of wrestling, but unfortunately the guy who wrote it is the guy who wrote a couple of books that are just amongst the most boring wrestling books I've ever read. I will say this about the Bucks book. Boy, it flows, and it moves, and it's good. And you owe yourself, if you're a fan of modern wrestling at all, to check it out. That's my little plug for their book. Anyway, thanks a lot. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.